Welcome to Story Tales. Please like this video and subscribe to Story Tales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin.
The warehouse smell clung to Marin's clothes as she pulled into the driveway of the two-story house in Aurora. Diesel fuel and cardboard boxes. 27 years old, and she still carried that sent home every day from her job coordinating supply chains. Her supervisor had sent everyone home early when the main computer system crashed, leaving invoices scattered across desks and trucks sitting idle in the yard. She parked her Honda behind her father's pickup and noticed an unfamiliar rental truck in the street. Strange. No one had mentioned visitors. Marin pushed through the front door and stopped dead. Cardboard boxes lined the hallway. Her boxes. The blue plastic storage bins she kept her winter clothes in sat stacked near the stairs. Her mother Helen knelt beside an open box, carefully wrapping Marin's coffee mugs in newspaper. "What's going on?" Marin set down her keys on the hall table. Helen looked up, her graying hair pulled back in the loose ponytail she wore when cleaning house. "Oh, honey, you're home early." "Mom, what are you doing with my things?" "We need to talk." Helen stood slowly, brushing dust off her knees. "Your father's in the kitchen." Marin walked past the boxes, her work boots heavy on the hardwood floor. In the kitchen, she found Gerald Rourke sitting at the round oak table, his thick fingers wrapped around a coffee mug. At 62, he still had the broad shoulders of the factory worker he'd been for 30 years before his pension kicked in. His gray hair was combed back, and he wore the serious expression he saved for family meetings about money or problems. Trent stood leaning against the counter, arms crossed. Her older brother had their father's build, but none of his work ethic. At 32, Trent had bounced between construction jobs and unemployment more times than Marin could count. His wife, Melanie, sat at the table across from Gerald, her hand resting on the small bump of her belly. For months pregnant and already using it like a shield. "There you are." Melanie smiled with her perfect white teeth. "We were hoping to get everything sorted before you got home." "Sorted?" Marin looked around the room. "What exactly needs sorting?" Gerald cleared his throat. "Sit down, Marin." "I'll stand. What's going on with my stuff?" "Trent and Melanie need a place to live," Helen said from the doorway. "With the baby coming and all. They have an apartment." Had Trent said, "Lease is up next month. Rent's going up to $1,800. We can't afford that with a kid coming." Marin stared at him. "So you're moving in here?" "Temporarily," Melanie said. She smoothed her blonde hair behind one ear. "Until we can save up for a house. You know how hard it is for young families these days." "I'm 27. You're 30. We're both young." "But you don't have a family to think about," Gerald said. "Trent needs support right now." The words hit Marin like cold water. "Support." "You've always been independent," Helen added quickly. "Even as a little girl, you took care of yourself. You're strong enough to be on your own." "And I'm not." "That's not what she meant," Trent said. But his smirk said otherwise. Marin looked around the kitchen table, the place where she'd eaten breakfast every morning for 27 years, where she'd done homework while her mother cooked dinner, where she'd sat with her grandmother during Sunday visits, listening to stories about the old country. "Where exactly am I supposed to go?" "We found you a nice studio apartment," Melanie said. "It's small but perfect for someone single. Very affordable." "How affordable?" $900 a month, Gerald said. "We'll cover the deposit and first month." 900. Marin's supply chain job paid decent money, but 900 would eat up half her take-home pay. "That's more than I've ever paid for anything." "You'll manage," Helen said. "You always do." Marin walked to the window over the sink and looked out at the backyard. The oak tree her grandfather had planted when Helen was born still spread its branches over half the lawn. She'd climbed that tree as a kid, reading books in its shade during summer afternoons. "This house needs a family in it," Gerald said behind her. "Not just you working late nights and weekends." She turned around. "I am family. You know what I mean." "Do I?" Trent pushed off from the counter. "Look, Marin, this isn't personal, but you've always been too cold to fit into a family anyway. Maybe it's time you found your own place." The kitchen went quiet. Helen stared at the table. Gerald sipped his coffee. Melanie examined her fingernails. Marin had learned long ago that anger was a luxury she couldn't afford in this house. Getting emotional meant losing ground. Crying meant weakness. Shouting meant being dismissed as dramatic. She walked to the hallway and picked up one of the boxes. Her winter sweaters were folded neatly inside. "The truck's outside," Trent called. "I can help you load." Marin carried the box to her Honda and put it in the back seat. She made 6 more trips, loading everything they'd packed. Her clothes, her books, her small television, her desk lamp. The pieces of a life reduced to cardboard containers. Helen appeared in the doorway as Marin loaded the last box. "Honey, you'll come for dinner on Sundays, won't you? This will always be your home, too." Marin slammed the car door and looked at her mother. Helen's face showed the same expression she wore when the neighbor's dog got hit by a car last spring. Sad but resigned, like bad things just happened and there was nothing you could do about them. "Will it?" "Of course." "Then why are you throwing me out?" "We're not throwing you out. We're helping you start your adult life." Marin got in her car and started the engine. Through the windshield, she could see Trent watching from the living room window, his arm around Melanie's shoulders. They looked pleased with themselves. She backed out of the driveway and drove away from the house where she'd lived for 27 years. In her rearview mirror, she watched it shrink until it disappeared behind the trees. The Sunset Gardens apartment complex sat on the edge of Aurora like an afterthought. 2-story buildings with brown siding and narrow windows. The parking lot had more potholes than asphalt, and weeds grew through the cracks in the sidewalk. Unit 47 was on the 2nd floor. Marin climbed the outdoor stairs, her key ring jingling in the humid evening air. The door opened onto a single room with a kitchenette in one corner and a bathroom barely big enough for one person. The carpet was tan and worn thin in places. The single window looked out onto the dumpsters. She set her first box on the counter and looked around. 400 square feet. This was what independence looked like. Her phone buzzed. A text from Helen. "Let us know when you're settled. Love you." Marin deleted the message without responding. IT took 3 hours to bring everything upstairs. The Honda wasn't built for moving, and she had to make a dozen trips. By the time she finished, her back ached and sweat soaked through her work shirt. She opened a box labeled "Personal" and found her photo albums, old report cards, and a manila envelope she didn't recognize. Her name was written on the outside in spidery handwriting, for Marin Rose Rourke. Inside were 3 letters tied with a blue ribbon. The paper was cream-colored and thick, the kind her grandmother had used for special occasions. The first letter was dated 2 years AGOM. "Why, dear Marin, if you are reading this, I am gone and your parents have finally told you about our arrangement. When your grandfather and I bought the house on Maple Street, we always intended for it to stay in the family. Your father promised me that when we were gone, the house would go to you. You were always the responsible one, even as a little girl. Trent has a good heart, but he lacks focus. You have something special, determination and strength that reminds me of myself at your age. The house should be yours someday. Your father knows this. We discussed it many times and he agreed. Don't let him forget his promise. All my love." Grandma Rourke Marin's hands shook as she read the second letter, then the third. Each one repeated the same message. The house was meant for her. Gerald had promised his dying mother that Marin would inherit the family home. She set the letters on the counter and stared at them. Her grandmother had been dead for 3 years. 3 years of Gerald knowing about this promise while he watched Trent drift from job to job. while he encouraged Marin to work longer hours and save money, while he planned to hand everything over to his son. Marin folded the letters carefully and put them back in the envelope. She walked to the window and looked out at the dumpsters and the broken fence behind them. They thought she would disappear quietly, take her $900 apartment and her weekend dinner invitations, and be grateful for what she got. They were wrong. Marin unpacked in silence, putting her clothes in the single dresser and her books on the built-in shelves. The apartment came furnished with basics: a bed, a table, 2 chairs, and a small couch that had seen better decades. Everything was clean but worn, like a hotel room that had hosted too many temporary residents. She made a sandwich from the groceries Helen had packed for her and ate standing at the counter. Outside, traffic hummed on Route 59, and a train whistle echoed across the prairie. The sounds of other people's lives going somewhere. Her phone rang. Trent's name appeared on the screen. "You get settled, okay?" "Fine. Good. Hey, I wanted to say thanks for being so cool about everything. I know it's an adjustment." Marin said nothing. Melanie's really stressed about the baby and everything. This takes a lot of pressure off. "I'm sure it does. We'll have you over for dinner once we get situated. Melanie wants to paint the nursery yellow since we don't know if it's a boy or girl yet." "The nursery?" "Yeah, we're using your old room. It gets the best morning light." Marin closed her eyes. "My room. Well, it'll be the baby's room now. But you'll always have a place at the table, you know? Family's family." "Right. Anyway, I should go help Mom finish cleaning up. See you soon." The line went dead. Marin set her phone on the counter and walked to the bathroom. In the small mirror above the sink, she looked pale and tired. Her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, and her brown eyes had the flat expression she wore when customers yelled at her about late shipments. She brushed her teeth and changed into pajamas, then lay down on the unfamiliar bed. The mattress was too soft, and springs creaked when she moved. Through the thin walls, she could hear her neighbor's television and a couple arguing about money. Marin stared at the ceiling and thought about Trent painting her bedroom yellow, about Melanie choosing curtains and arranging furniture in the space where Marin had grown up, about Gerald sitting at the kitchen table, drinking coffee and pretending he'd never made any promises to his dying mother. She thought about the letters tied with blue ribbon, hidden in an envelope for 3 years while her family planned her exile. They wanted her gone so they could play house with Trent's baby. They wanted her quiet and grateful and out of the way. But Marin had never been quiet, even when they mistook her silence for compliance. She'd been watching and listening and remembering every slight, every dismissal, every time they chose Trent's comfort over her dignity. Tomorrow she would start looking for allies. She would study her options and plan her moves carefully, the same way she tracked shipments across 3 states and made sure every delivery arrived on time. They thought they knew her. They thought she was the reliable daughter who would bend and adapt and make do with whatever scraps they offered. They were about to learn the difference between quiet and defeated. 3 days later, Marin sat across from Naomi Weller in Murphy's Tavern, a dive bar on the south side of Aurora, where the beer was cold and the lighting was dim enough to hide everyone's problems. Naomi worked behind the bar most evenings, her sharp wit and quick hands keeping the regulars happy and the troublemakers in line. That they'd been friends since elementary school, bonding over being the kids whose families had less money and bigger problems than everyone else in their class. While other girls played with American Girl dolls, Marin and Naomi had collected cans for recycling money and walked to school together when the bus broke down. So they just packed your stuff while you were at work. Naomi wiped down the bar with a rag, her movements quick and efficient, like I was being evicted. Marin sipped her beer, a local IPA that tasted bitter and clean. Trent was directing traffic, telling them which box went where. And your parents went along with it. Mom kept saying how strong I am, how I can handle anything. Marin set down her glass harder than necessary. Dad talked about the house needing a real family. Jesus. Naomi shook her head. You've been supporting yourself since you were 19. Trent's been living off unemployment and odd jobs for the past 2 years. But he's having a baby now. That changes everything. Does it? Or does it just give them an excuse to do what they always wanted to do? Marin looked around the bar. A few regulars sat at the other end, watching a Cubs game on the mounted television. The place smelled like fried food and old wood, comfortable in its shabbiness. You remember how things were when we were kids, Naomi continued. Trent got the new bike for his birthday. You got the hand-me-down from the garage sale. He was older, by 5 years. When you turned 13, where was your new bike? Marin remembered. She'd asked for one, saved birthday money and done extra chores. Her parents said they'd think about it, then Christmas came and went with no bicycle under the tree. Trent got a video game system that year. Trent got chances, Naomi said. You got expectations. A customer at the end of the bar raised his empty glass, and Naomi walked over to refill it. Marin watched her friend work, efficient and confident in her element. Naomi had never let anyone push her around, not even when they were kids, and she was smaller than everyone else in their grade. When Naomi returned, she leaned on the bar and looked directly at Marin. What are you going to do about it? What can I do? It's their house. Is it? What do you mean? I mean, your grandmother lived there for 40 years before she moved to the nursing home. Your parents took care of her. Sure, but there might be more to the story. Marin thought about the letters hidden in her apartment. She hadn't told anyone about them yet, not even Naomi. Some secrets needed time to ripen before you shared them. Maybe. You can't just roll over on this, Marin. They're counting on you being the good daughter who doesn't make waves. But you've got rights too. Do I? Hell yes, you do. You're not some kid they can shuffle around anymore. You're 27 years old with a steady job and a backbone. Use them both. Marin finished her beer and left $20 on the bar. Thanks for listening. Anytime. But Marin. Naomi caught her arm as she stood. Don't let them erase you. You matter too. Walking to her car, Marin felt something loosen in her chest. For 3 days, she'd been carrying the weight of her family's decision alone, turning it over in her mind like a rock in her shoe. Naomi's anger on her behalf felt like permission to be angry too. The drive back to Sunset Gardens took 15 minutes through quiet suburban streets. Marin parked in front of Building C and climbed the stairs to her apartment. As she reached the landing, she heard hammering from the unit next door. The door was propped open, and she could see a man inside working on kitchen cabinets. He looked up when her keys jingled. Sorry about the noise, he said, setting down his hammer. The cabinet door was hanging crooked. Landlord said I could fix it myself. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with calloused hands and carpenter's clothes. His hair was brown with gray threads at the temples, and his face had the weathered look of someone who worked outside. I'm Curtis Doyle, he said, wiping his hands on his jeans. I moved in last week. Marin Rourke. I just moved in too. Yeah. Where from? Here in town. Family situation changed. Curtis nodded, like he understood without needing details. I know how that goes. Mind if I ask what you do for work? Trying to get a feel for the neighborhood. Supply chain coordination. Import logistics mostly. You. Carpenter. Residential construction and remodeling. He gestured at the cabinet. Comes in handy in a place like this. They talked for a few more minutes about the building, the area, and the challenges of apartment living. Curtis had an easy way about him. No judgment in his eyes when she mentioned living alone. Some people looked at a single woman in her 20s like she was either desperate or defective. Curtis just listened. I should let you get back to it, Marin said finally. Actually, I was about to take a break. You want a beer? I've got a cooler on the balcony. Marin hesitated. She didn't know this man, and 3 days ago she'd been living with her family. But 3 days ago, Seemed like a different lifetime. Sure. They sat on his small balcony, which faced the parking lot but caught a breeze from the west. Curtis handed her a cold Budweiser and opened one for himself. "So what kind of family situation changed?" he asked. "The kind where they decide you're expendable." "Ah, been there." He took a long drink. "My ex-wife's family never thought I was good enough for her. When we divorced, they made sure I knew exactly how disposable I was." "You have kids?" "A son, Lucas. He's 8, lives with his mom most of the time, but I get him every other weekend and Wednesday evenings." Curtis smiled, and his face changed completely. Best kid in the world, but that's probably what every dad says. "What happened? With the divorce, I mean." "We got married too young, had different ideas about what we wanted. Her family had money and influence, and they never let me forget I was just a carpenter. When things got tough, they convinced her she could do better." Marin watched his face as he talked. There was hurt there, but no bitterness, just the practical acceptance of someone who'd learned to work with what life handed him. "Do you miss it, being part of their family?" "I miss my son every day he's not with me. But the rest of it—" Curtis shrugged. "You can't miss something you never really had. They tolerated me because I made their daughter happy for a while. When I stopped making her happy, the tolerance ended. At least they were honest about it. Your family wasn't." Marin told him about the move, about Trent and Melanie taking over the house, about being set up in the studio apartment like a consolation prize. Curtis listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. "Sounds like they've got their priorities worked out," he said when she finished. Meaning they know who matters and who doesn't. "Question is, do you agree with their assessment?" "What choice do I have?" "Same choice everyone has. You can accept their version of your worth, or you can decide for yourself what you're worth." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set behind the trees. Traffic hummed in the distance, and somewhere in the building a dog barked. "You know what the hardest part was?" Curtis said eventually. "Watching my son learn that families can just decide you don't belong anymore. He was only 5 when we split up, but he understood that Daddy wasn't welcome at Christmas dinner or birthday parties. That kind of rejection teaches kids lessons you don't want them to learn." Marin thought about Trent's unborn child growing up in her grandmother's house, learning that Aunt Marin was the family member who lived somewhere else and visited sometimes, learning that love came with conditions and family loyalty had limits. "Maybe kids are tougher than we think," she said. "Maybe. Or maybe they learn to be tough because they have to be." When Marin went back to her apartment that night, she felt less alone than she had since moving out. Naomi's anger and Curtis's understanding had given her something to build on. 2 people who knew what it felt like to be pushed aside, who'd survived the experience and found ways to build new lives. She pulled out the letters from her grandmother and read them again, looking for details she'd missed the first time. Each one mentioned Gerald's promise explicitly. Each one expressed confidence that Marin would inherit the house when the time came. Her grandmother had trusted Gerald to keep his word, had believed that family promises meant something, that doing right by your children mattered more than taking the easy path. She'd been wrong about Gerald, but she'd been right about Marin. Marin did have determination and strength. She just needed to figure out how to use them. The first Sunday dinner invitation came 2 weeks later. Helen's voice on the phone was bright and cheerful, as if nothing had changed. "We're having pot roast at 3. Your favorite. Can you make it?" Marin sat in her apartment, looking at the stack of bills on her kitchen table. Rent, utilities, groceries, gas for her car. The numbers added up to exactly what she'd feared. No money left over for anything extra. "I'll be there." "Wonderful. We can't wait to see you." Marin drove to Maple Street at 2:45, parking behind Trent's truck in the driveway. The house looked the same from outside, But when she walked through the front door, everything felt different. Melanie's influence showed in small details. New throw pillows on the couch, different magazines on the coffee table, a pregnancy book prominently displayed on the kitchen counter. The house was being redecorated around its new occupants. Marin! Helen hugged her at the door. How are you settling in? Fine. The apartment working out okay. It's fine. Gerald appeared from the living room, carrying the Sunday paper. Good to see you, kiddo. The familiar nickname felt hollow now, like something he said out of habit rather than affection. Dinner was strained. Trent dominated conversation with stories from his new construction job, while Melanie offered commentary on everything from the weather to the neighbors. Helen hung on their words like they were revealing state secrets, laughing too loud at Trent's jokes and agreeing with every opinion Melanie voiced. How's work going for you, Marin? Gerald asked during the lull. Busy. We're coordinating a major shipment from Vietnam next month. That sounds complicated, Melanie said. I could never keep track of all those details. Good thing you're good at that kind of thing. The comment felt like a pat on the head. Good girl, stay in your lane. What about you? Marin asked. Are you working? I'm focusing on the pregnancy right now. It's a full-time job, you know. Melanie smiled and rubbed her belly. Plus, we're planning the nursery. How's that going? Oh, it's going to be beautiful, Helen said. Melanie has such an eye for design. You should see the color scheme she's picked out. I'd love to see it. Well, Helen glanced at Melanie. It's not quite ready yet. That's okay. I can see my old room. Silence fell over the table. Trent cleared his throat. Actually, we've already started converting it. It's kind of a mess right now. Converting it how? You know, taking down your old posters and stuff. Painting. Getting it ready for baby furniture. Marin set down her fork. You threw away my things. Not threw away, Helen said quickly. We packed everything carefully. It's all in boxes in the basement. What about my desk? My bookshelf? We donated those, Melanie said. They didn't really fit the nursery theme. Marin had built that bookshelf herself in high school shop class. It was the first piece of furniture she'd ever made, painted white with careful attention to every detail. Her books had lived on those shelves for 10 years. Of course, she said quietly. We can show you the nursery after dessert, Helen offered, if you want to see it. No, that's okay. The rest of dinner crawled by. Helen served apple pie and coffee, chattering nervously about neighbors and whether while Trent and Melanie discussed baby names. Marin ate her pie in silence, tasting nothing. When it was time to leave, Helen walked her to the door. This was nice, wasn't it? Just like old times. Marin looked at her mother. Helen's face showed the same determined cheerfulness she wore when dealing with difficult customers at the grocery store where she worked part-time. Pleasant and accommodating, refusing to acknowledge that anything was wrong. Sure, Mom. We'll do it again next week. Maybe you can bring someone with you. Are you dating anyone? No. Well, that's okay. You'll meet someone when the time is right. Driving back to her apartment, Marin felt the weight of what she'd lost settling over her. Not just the house or her room, but the casual belonging that came with being part of a family. The assumption that your history mattered, that your presence was wanted, that there would always be a place set for you at the table. They'd erased her from the house as efficiently as they'd packed her belongings. New furniture, new decorations, new priorities. She was welcome as a guest now, invited to admire the life they were building in her absence. But guests went home at the end of the evening, and home was a studio apartment with thin walls and a view of the dumpsters. That night, she called Naomi. How was family dinner? They turned my room into a nursery. Already. Painted the walls, threw out my furniture, boxed up everything that proved I ever lived there. Marin sat on her couch, looking out at the parking lot. My mom wants to do it again next week. You going? I don't know. What do you want to do? Maren thought about it. What did she want? She wanted her room back. She wanted her bookshelf and her desk and her place at the family table. She wanted Gerald to remember his promise to his mother. She wanted Trent to acknowledge that his comfort shouldn't come at the cost of her dignity. Most of all, she wanted them to understand that she wasn't disposable. I want them to know what they did to me. Then make sure they know. How? That's up to you. But Maren, don't let them make you disappear. You're worth more than that. After hanging up, Maren sat in the dark, thinking about ways to make herself visible. She couldn't force her family to love her the way she wanted to be loved, but she could refuse to accept their version of events. She could stop pretending that everything was fine, stop making their decisions easier by going along quietly. She opened her laptop and started researching property records, inheritance law, and family trusts. If her grandmother's letters were accurate, there might be more to the story of the house on Maple Street. Gerald had made a promise to a dying woman. Time to find out what that promise was worth. The second Sunday dinner was worse than the first. Melanie had invited her sister and brother-in-law, turning the meal into a celebration of the coming baby. They spent the entire time discussing cribs and car seats and baby shower plans, while Maren sat at the edge of the conversation like a polite stranger. When Helen brought out an ultrasound photo to show everyone, the family crowded around the kitchen table cooing over the grainy black and white image. Maren found herself pushed to the outer edge of the circle, looking over shoulders at the future that had displaced her. Isn't it amazing? Melanie's sister gushed. You can see the little hands. Takes after Trent, Gerald said proudly. Look at that strong jaw. All babies look like aliens in ultrasounds. Maren said. The table went quiet. Everyone stared at her. I mean, you can't really tell what they look like until they're born, she added quickly. Some people have more imagination than others, Melanie said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The conversation moved on, but Maren caught the looks that passed between family members. The eye rolls and meaningful glances that said she was being difficult, unsupportive, jealous. Maybe she was all those things. But she was also tired of pretending to be happy about her own erasure. The third Sunday, she almost didn't go. But Helen called twice to confirm, and guilt won out over pride. This time, the dinner conversation centered around Melanie's baby shower plans. Helen was organizing everything, treating it like a major family celebration. We're thinking of having it here at the house, Helen said as she served mashed potatoes. The living room has such good light for photos. That sounds lovely, Maren said. Of course. You'll help with the planning, Helen continued. We'll need someone to coordinate the decorations and refreshments. I'll be working most weekends through the holidays. Big shipping season. Oh. Helen's face fell. Well, we'll figure something out. I'm sure you will. After dinner, Trent pulled her aside in the hallway. What's your problem lately? I don't have a problem. You're being weird. Mom's worried about you. Weird how? Antisocial. Negative. Like you don't want to be here. Maren looked at him. At 32, Trent still had the soft look of someone who'd never had to fight for anything. His job was going well because Gerald had gotten him connected with the right people. His housing was secure because their parents had evicted their daughter to make room for him. His future was bright because everyone else had moved aside to give him space to shine. Maybe I don't want to be here. Then why do you keep coming? Good question. Trent's face hardened. Look, I know this transition has been hard for you, but we're all family here. We need to stick together. Are we? All family. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. Forget it. But Maren didn't forget it. She thought about it all week, turning the conversation over in her mind. Trent's casual assumption that she was the problem, that her discomfort was something to be managed rather than addressed. Helen's expectation that she would help plan a celebration in the house she'd been forced to leave. the assumption that she would smile and participate and be grateful for whatever scraps of inclusion they offered. The fourth Sunday dinner was the breaking point. This time, Melanie had invited her mother, a sharp-faced woman named Patricia, who made her opinions known early and often. She spent the first part of dinner criticizing everything from the seasonings in the pot roast to the choice of vegetables. "Melanie's always been sensitive to strong flavors," Patricia explained to Helen. "Pregnancy makes it worse, of course. She needs bland foods that won't upset her stomach." "Of course," Helen agreed, looking embarrassed about her cooking. "When she was little, I had to make separate meals just for her. Regular food was too spicy, too salty, too everything. Some people just have delicate constitutions." Marion watched her mother absorb the criticism without defending herself. Helen had cooked the same pot roast recipe for 20 years, and it had never been too spicy for anyone before. "The house is coming along beautifully," Patricia continued, looking around the dining room. "Much more comfortable than that horrible apartment Trent was living in." "We love having them here," Gerald said. "A house needs a family in it." "Absolutely. Young couples today have such a hard time getting started. It's wonderful that you can provide stability during this important time." Patricia turned to Marion with the polite smile people used when acknowledging someone they considered irrelevant. "And you're doing well in your little apartment, dear." "Fine. That's nice. Independence is so important for young women today. My generation got married right out of high school, but you girls have careers now." The word careers sounded like something distasteful in Patricia's mouth. "Marin works in supply chain logistics," Helen said proudly. "Very complicated work." "How interesting. I'm sure that keeps you busy." "It does. No time for dating, I imagine. Career girls often find it difficult to balance work and personal life." Marin set down her water glass carefully. "I find time for the things that matter to me." "Of course you do, dear." The conversation moved on to baby preparations. Patricia had strong opinions about everything from stroller brands to diaper choices, and she shared them all in excruciating detail. Melanie absorbed the advice with wide-eyed gratitude while Helen took notes on a piece of paper. "The nursery is going to be perfect," Patricia said. "Melanie showed me the pictures. Yellow is such a smart choice when you don't know the gender." "We can't wait for you to see it in person," Helen said to Patricia. "Oh, I'd love a tour after dinner." "Of course. Marin hasn't seen it yet either." All eyes turned to Marin. She felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I've been busy." "Well, today's the perfect day," Melanie said brightly. "We just finished the final touches yesterday." After dinner, the whole group trooped upstairs like tourists following guide. Marin found herself at the back of the crowd as they gathered in the doorway of what had been her bedroom for 20 years. The room was unrecognizable. The walls were painted soft yellow with white trim. A crib sat where her desk had been, and a changing table occupied the corner where her bookshelf once stood. Stuffed animals lined the windowsill, and a mobile of dancing bears hung from the ceiling. It was beautiful, carefully planned and lovingly executed. Every detail chosen with thought and care. It was also a complete erasure of everything that had come before. "What do you think?" Melanie asked, her hand on her belly. "Very nice," Marin said. "The crib was my baby bed," Patricia said proudly. "We kept it in storage all these years, waiting for the right time." "It's perfect," Helen agreed. Gerald stood in the doorway, beaming like he'd built the room himself. Trent had his arm around Melanie's shoulders, both of them glowing with pride and anticipation. They looked like a catalog photo of the ideal family preparing for their first child. Happy, secure, surrounded by love and support, Marin backed away from the doorway and walked downstairs alone. She found her purse on the kitchen counter and headed for the front door. "Leaving so soon?" Helen called from upstairs. I have some things to take care of. Will we see you next Sunday? Marin paused with her hand on the doorknob. Through the living room window, she could see Mrs. Henderson working in her garden next door, the same neighbor who'd watched Marin grow up in this house, who'd known her grandmother and remembered when Gerald was just a young father trying to provide for his family. "I'll let you know," she called back. She drove home through the quiet Sunday streets, past families loading into cars for afternoon outings and kids riding bikes in their driveways. Normal families doing normal family things, secure in the knowledge that they belonged somewhere, her apartment. She sat on the couch and stared at the wall. The silence felt different now, not peaceful, but empty. She was 27 years old, financially independent, and completely alone in the world. Her phone rang. Curtis, from next door. "You okay? I heard you come home early." "I'm fine." "Feel like company?" "I just picked up Lucas for the evening. We're making spaghetti and watching a movie. You're welcome to join us." Marin looked around her empty apartment, at the stack of unpaid bills on the counter and the frozen dinner in her freezer and the silence that pressed against her eardrums. "That sounds nice." Curtis's apartment was the same layout as hers, but felt completely different. Family photos covered the refrigerator, and Lucas's drawings were taped to the wall. Toys were scattered across the living room floor, and a backpack full of homework sat on the kitchen table. It looked like a home. Lucas was 8 years old with his father's brown hair and serious eyes. He shook Marin's hand politely when Curtis introduced them, then went back to building something elaborate with Legos. "He's shy at first," Curtis explained as he stirred sauce on the stove, "but he'll talk your ear off once he gets comfortable." They ate dinner at the small kitchen table, Lucas chattering about school and friends and the castle he was building. Curtis listened with the focused attention of a parent who only got his child part-time, absorbing every detail like it might have to last. "Dad, tell Marin about the treehouse." Lucas sat around a mouthful of spaghetti. "Lucas thinks we should build a treehouse in the backyard," Curtis explained, "even though we live in an apartment." "We could ask the landlord," Lucas said seriously. "Maybe he'd let us if we promised to take good care of it." "Maybe," Curtis agreed. "What do you think, Marin? Should we petition for treehouse rights?" "Absolutely. Every kid needs a treehouse." "Did you have one when you were little?" Lucas asked. "No, but I always wanted one. I used to climb the oak tree in my backyard and pretend." "What happened to the tree?" Marin paused with her fork halfway to her mouth. "It's still there, but it's not my backyard anymore." Lucas nodded solemnly. "That happens sometimes. My mom and dad used to live in the same house, but now I have 2 houses. It's confusing." "It is confusing. But sometimes it's okay too. Like I get 2 Christmases now, and Dad makes better spaghetti than Mom." Curtis laughed. "Don't let your mother hear you say that." After dinner, they watched an animated movie about robots saving the world. Lucas fell asleep on the couch halfway through, his head pillowed on his father's arm. Curtis didn't move, just kept one hand on his son's back and watched the movie over the boy's head. "He looks like you," Marin whispered. "Everyone says that. I think he looks like his mom, but with my stubborn streak." "How often do you get to see him?" "Not enough. Every other weekend and Wednesday evenings, unless something comes up. His mom's pretty good about being flexible, but it's hard being the part-time parent." "Do you regret the divorce?" Curtis considered the question while robots battled aliens on the television screen. "I regret that Lucas had to go through it. I regret that we couldn't find a way to make it work. But staying together would have been worse for everyone, including him." "How do you know?" "Because pretending to be happy when you're not teaches kids that love looks like resignation. I'd rather he learned that sometimes people have to make hard choices to find where they really belong." Marin watched Lucas sleep, his face peaceful and trusting. 8 years old and already learning that families could be complicated, that love didn't always look the way you expected it to. What if you never find where you belong? Then you build it yourself. When the movie ended, Curtis carried Lucas to bed while Marin cleaned up the dinner dishes. The kitchen felt warm and lived in, full of the comfortable mess that came with real life being lived. "Thank you for dinner," she said when Curtis returned. "Anytime. It's nice having neighbors who feel like friends." Walking back to her own apartment, Marin realized something had shifted during the evening. The crushing loneliness she'd felt after leaving her family's house had lifted slightly, replaced by something that felt like possibility. She couldn't go back to being Gerald and Helen's grateful daughter, content with whatever place they carved out for her at the margins of their lives. She couldn't pretend that Trent's comfort mattered more than her dignity, or that Melanie's pregnancy justified her erasure, but she could build something new. She could surround herself with people who saw her clearly and valued her presence. She could stop trying to earn love from people who'd already decided she was expendable, and she could make sure that her family understood the cost of their choices. The letters from her grandmother sat on her kitchen counter, 3 pieces of paper that held the key to everything they'd taken from her. Gerald's promise to his dying mother. The family home that was supposed to be Marin's inheritance. Time to find out what promises were worth in a court of law. Marin spent the next 3 days researching estate law and property records. Illinois had clear statutes about inheritance promises, and the letters from her grandmother constituted evidence of Gerald's commitment to pass the house to her. They weren't a legal will, but they established intent and expectation. More importantly, they gave her leverage. She called her mother on Wednesday evening. "Marin, how lovely to hear from you. Are you coming to dinner this Sunday? Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something. Can you meet me for coffee tomorrow?" "Of course. Is everything all right?" "We just need to have a conversation. About the house." Helen's pause lasted a beat too long. "What about the house?" "I think you know what about the house, Mom." They met at Rosie's Diner on Route 59, a local place that served decent coffee and minded its own business. Helen arrived first, choosing a booth in the back corner away from other customers. She looked nervous, twisting her wedding ring around her finger and checking the door every few minutes. Marin slid into the seat across from her and set a manila envelope on the table between them. "What's that?" Helen asked. "Letters from Grandma. She left them for me." Helen's face went pale. "What letters?" "The ones where she talks about Dad's promise, about how the house was supposed to be mine." "Oh, Marin, you knew about this. It's complicated." "Is it?" "Because the letters seem pretty clear. Dad promised his dying mother that I would inherit the family home. Then he gave it to Trent instead." Helen stared at her coffee cup. "Your grandmother had ideas about how things should be. She didn't always understand the practical realities." "What practical realities?" "Trent needs stability. He's starting a family. You're strong and independent. You don't need." "I don't need what, Mom? A home? A family?" "Basic honesty from the people who raised me." "It's not about what you need. It's about what's best for everyone." Marin opened the envelope and pulled out the letters. "Listen to this. Your father promised me that when we were gone, the house would go to you. We discussed it many times and he agreed." She was old, Marin. Sometimes she confused things. All 3 letters say the same thing, written over 2 years. Was she confused for 2 years straight? Helen reached across the table and tried to take Marin's hand. "Honey, I know you're hurt, but we can't change what's already been decided. Trent and Melanie need the house. You'll find your own place, build your own life. That's what strong people do." Marin pulled her hand away. "Stop telling me how strong I am. I'm sick of being strong. I'm sick of being the one who has to adapt and adjust and make do while everyone else gets what they want. That's not fair. Isn't it? When has anyone in our family ever sacrificed for my comfort? When has anyone ever said, "Let's think about what Marin needs"? Helen's eyes filled with tears. "We're trying to do what's best for the family as a whole." "I'm not part of the family as a whole." "Of course you are. Then why am I the only one who doesn't get a vote?" The waitress approached their table with a coffee pot, took one look at their faces, and retreated without a word. "What do you want me to say?" Helen asked finally. "I want you to admit that you and Dad broke a promise to a dying woman because it was easier than standing up to Trent." "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" Helen wiped her eyes with a paper napkin. "Your grandmother always favored you. From the time you were little, she thought you were special, responsible. She had this idea that you should inherit everything because you were the one who would take care of it properly. And maybe she was right. Maybe you would have been the better choice. But life isn't about what's right in theory, Marin. It's about what works in practice. Throwing me out works in practice. No one threw you out. We helped you get your own place. We're still family. Are we? Because I went to see my old room last Sunday, and there's no trace that I ever lived there. You erased me, Mom. Completely." Helen started crying in earnest then, quiet tears that she tried to hide behind her coffee cup. "We didn't mean to hurt you. But you did hurt me. And instead of fixing it, you keep telling me it's for the best. What choice do we have? Trent and Melanie are already living there. She's pregnant. We can't just kick them out. You could acknowledge what you did wrong. You could admit that you broke a promise and chose convenience over keeping your word. And then what? What would that change?" Marin looked at her mother across the table. Helen was 58 years old, tired from working part-time jobs and managing other people's problems. She'd spent her whole life avoiding conflict, smoothing over difficulties, making peace at any cost. She genuinely didn't understand why an apology mattered if it couldn't change the practical outcome. "It would change how I see all of you," Marin said. "Right now, I think you're cowards who threw me away the first time it was convenient. An honest conversation might help me think differently. We didn't throw you away. Then what would you call it?" Helen had no answer for that. Marin gathered up the letters and put them back in the envelope. "I'm going to show these to other people. Neighbors who knew Grandma. Relatives who remember the conversations she had about the house." "Why?" "Because I want everyone to know what kind of people you really are. Marin, please, think about the baby. Think about the family. I thought about the family for 27 years, Mom. Time to think about myself for a while." She left Helen sitting in the booth, staring at her untouched coffee and crying quietly into her napkin. The first person Marin called was her great-aunt Margaret, Gerald's younger sister, who lived in the next town over. Margaret had always been fond of her grandmother and might remember conversations about the house. "Of course I remember," Margaret said over the phone. "Mother talked about it constantly toward the end. She was so proud of how responsible you were, how you'd take care of the place properly. Gerald promised her you'd inherit it." "Did he seem like he meant it at the time?" "Oh, absolutely. He was very reassuring about it. Mother died peacefully because she thought the house would stay in good hands. And now—" Margaret sighed. "Now I don't know what to think. Gerald's changed since Mother died. More focused on what's easy than what's right." Marin's next call was to Mrs. Henderson, the neighbor who'd lived next door for 30 years. Mrs. Henderson remembered the conversations, too. "Your grandmother used to talk about it when we worked in our gardens," the older woman said. "She was so pleased that you'd be inheriting the house someday. Said it needed someone who understood its history." "Did she ever mention that to my parents?" "Oh, yes. She talked to your father about it several times when she visited. He always agreed with her plans." By the end of the week, Marin had documented a pattern of promises and assurances that stretched back 3 years. Gerald had repeatedly told his dying mother that Marin would inherit the family home. Neighbors and relatives had witnessed these conversations, Everyone had expected Gerald to keep his word that on Saturday morning. She drove to Maple Street and parked across from the house. Through the living room window, she could see Trent setting up a baby swing in the corner where her grandmother's piano used to sit. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Gerald. "Your mother told me about your conversation. We need to talk." She texted back, "Yes, we do. Come to dinner tomorrow. We'll settle this." Marin stared at the message. Gerald wanted to settle this over pot roast and small talk, surrounded by the family that had chosen Trent's comfort over her dignity. He wanted to manage her anger like a business problem that could be resolved with the right combination of guilt and manipulation. She typed, "No, come to my apartment. Tonight at 7. Alone." The response came quickly, "Fine." Gerald knocked on her door at exactly 7 o'clock, carrying himself with the rigid posture of a man preparing for an unpleasant but necessary conversation. He looked around her small apartment with obvious discomfort, taking in the cheap furniture and narrow windows. "Sit down," Marin said, gesturing to the couch. He remained standing. "Your mother said you have some letters." "I have some letters. Would you like to read them?" "I know what they say." "Do you?" "Because Mom seems to think Grandma was confused about your conversations." Gerald's jaw tightened. "Your grandmother was a strong-willed woman with definite ideas about how things should be done, and you agreed with those ideas, according to her letters." I said what she needed to hear. The words hung in the air between them. Marin felt something cold settle in her stomach. "You lied to her." "I comforted a dying woman. Sometimes that requires telling people what they want to hear." "She was your mother, Dad. She trusted you to keep your word." "She was asking me to choose between my children. That's not a choice any parent should have to make." "But you did make a choice. You chose Trent." Gerald finally sat down on the edge of the couch, his hands clasped between his knees. "I chose what made the most sense for everyone involved, including me. You don't need the house, Marin. You've got a good job, you're responsible with money. You'll do fine on your own. Trent needs help getting started. Trent is 32 years old, and he's starting a family. That changes a man's priorities." "What about my priorities? What about the promise you made?" "I made a lot of promises to your grandmother over the years. I kept the ones that mattered. This one didn't matter." Gerald looked around the apartment again, his eyes taking in the thin carpet and the water stain on the ceiling. "You're doing fine." "Because I have to. Because you left me no choice." "Everyone has choices, Marin. You chose to be independent and self-sufficient. That's admirable." "I didn't choose anything. You decided I was strong enough to handle being thrown away, so you threw me away." "We didn't throw you away. We helped you get your own place. After you packed my belongings while I was at work." Gerald stood up, his patience clearly running thin. "What do you want, Marin? Do you want us to kick out a pregnant woman? Do you want us to break up Trent's marriage? What exactly are you hoping to accomplish here?" "I want you to admit that you broke a promise to your dying mother because it was easier than telling Trent no. And then what?" "And then we'll see what that's worth." Gerald stared at her for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was harder than she'd ever heard it. "You're just like her, you know. Your grandmother. Stubborn and unforgiving. She held grudges for decades over the smallest slights. Maybe she had good reason. Maybe she did. But it made her a bitter old woman who died angry at half her family. Is that what you think I'll become?" "I think you're heading that direction, yes." Gerald walked to the door and put his hand on the knob. "Let this go, Marin. For your own sake. Anger will eat you alive if you let it. Will it? Or will it give me the strength to fight for what's mine?" He turned back to look at her. "Nothing is yours unless you earn it. And you don't earn things by making demands and threatening family members. I earned my place in that house by being a good daughter for 27 years. by working hard and causing no trouble and never asking for anything I didn't deserve. And now you're asking for something you can't have. Because you gave it to someone else. Gerald opened the door. I gave it to someone who needed it more. You gave it to someone you love more. He left without denying it. After he was gone, Marin sat on her couch in the gathering darkness, staring at the letters spread across her coffee table. 3 pieces of paper that documented a promise her father had never intended to keep. But promises weren't just moral obligations. Sometimes they were legal ones, too. She opened her laptop and started researching lawyers who specialized in inheritance disputes. The law office of Patricia Chin sat in a converted Victorian house near downtown Aurora, her nameplate discreetly mounted beside the front door. Marin climbed the steps on a Thursday morning, carrying a folder full of documents and a determination that had been building for 3 weeks. Patricia was younger than Marin had expected, maybe 35, with sharp eyes and an efficient manner that suggested she didn't waste time on pleasantries. She listened while Marin explained the situation, occasionally asking questions about dates and witnesses. "These letters are interesting," Patricia said, examining the pages with a magnifying glass. "Your grandmother's handwriting is consistent across all 3, and the content shows clear intent regarding the house's disposition. But they're not a legal will." "No, they're not. However, they could support a claim of promissory estoppel, which means if you can prove that your father made promises he intended you to rely on and that you suffered harm because of those promises, you might have a legal claim to compensation." Marin leaned forward. "What kind of compensation?" "That depends on what you can prove and what the judge decides is fair. But let's be realistic about your chances. Family property disputes are messy, and courts generally don't like to overturn existing arrangements unless there's clear fraud or coercion." "What about the promise to his mother?" "Morally compelling, but legally uncertain. Unless there's a written agreement or witness testimony about specific commitments, it becomes he said, she said." Marin felt her hope deflating. "So there's nothing I can do?" "I didn't say that. The letters establish a pattern of family discussions about inheritance. If we can find other evidence, financial records, insurance policies, property improvements you contributed to, we might be able to build a case." "What kind of case?" "A claim that you have a legal interest in the property based on reasonable reliance on family promises. It wouldn't give you the house outright, but it might force a sale or require your family to compensate you for your interest." Patricia quoted her hourly rate and estimated costs. The numbers made Marin's stomach clench, but she'd been saving money for years. Living in a studio apartment had its advantages. "I need to think about it," Marin said. "Take your time, but if you're serious about pursuing this, don't wait too long. Memories fade and documents disappear." That evening, Marin called Naomi and explained the lawyer's assessment. "So you could actually get part of the house?" "Maybe, if I can prove my case and if the judge agrees that I've been wronged." "What would that mean for your family?" "It would mean they'd have to either buy out my interest or sell the house and split the proceeds. And they'd hate you forever." Marin looked out her apartment window at the parking lot where Curtis was helping Lucas with his bicycle. The boy had gotten a flat tire, and they were working together to patch it, Lucas holding the tools while his father explained how inner tubes worked. "They already threw me away once," she said. "What's the worst they can do? Throw me away again." "Are you sure this is what you want?" "I want them to understand that actions have consequences, that you can't break promises and erase people without paying a price. Even if the price is losing your family entirely." "I lost my family the day they packed my belongings without telling me. Now I'm just making it official." The next morning, Marin returned to Patricia's office with a retainer check and a box of documents she'd gathered over the past week. Bank statements showing contributions she'd made to household expenses, receipts for home improvements she'd paid for, photos of work she'd done in the house and yard. This is more promising, Patricia said, reviewing the materials. You can document a pattern of financial contribution and investment in the property. Combined with the letters, it suggests you had reasonable expectations of future ownership. So you'll take the case? I'll take it, but I want to be clear about what we're facing. Your family will fight this, and it will get ugly. They'll argue that your contributions were gifts, that you lived rent-free for years, that you have no legal standing to claim ownership. Will they win? Maybe, but they'll have to explain why they promised the house to you if they never intended to follow through. And they'll have to justify why those promises aren't worth anything. Patricia filed the initial paperwork on a Tuesday morning in November. The legal documents were served to Gerald and Helen that afternoon by a sheriff's deputy who knocked on their door during dinner. Marin's phone started ringing 20 minutes later. She didn't answer. The calls continued for 3 days. Gerald, Helen, Trent, even Melanie left voicemails ranging from confused to angry to pleading. Marin listened to them all, but didn't respond to any. On Friday evening, Curtis knocked on her door. "Rough week?" he asked, noting the exhaustion on her face. "You could say that. Want to talk about it? Lucas is at his mom's place tonight." They sat on his balcony with beer and take-out Chinese food while Marin explained what she'd set in motion. Curtis listened without judgment, asking occasional questions about legal strategy and family dynamics. "How do you feel about it?" he asked when she finished. "Terrified, angry, relieved, guilty." Marin picked at her low mane with chopsticks, like I just declared war on everyone I've ever loved. Sometimes that's what it takes to get people's attention. What if they never forgive me? What if they do? What do you mean? I mean, maybe this is the shock they need to realize what they've done. Maybe forcing them to face consequences will make them think about their choices differently. Or maybe it will prove that I'm as bitter and unforgiving as my dad says I am. Curtis set down his beer and looked at her directly. "Can I tell you something about bitter and unforgiving?" "Sure. When my ex-wife left me, I spent 6 months trying to win her back. I begged, I pleaded, I promised to change everything about myself if she'd just give us another chance. You know what it got me?" "What?" "Nothing. Because the problem wasn't me or my behavior or anything I could fix. The problem was that she'd already decided I wasn't worth fighting for. All my begging just convinced her she'd made the right choice." "What did you do?" "I stopped begging. I hired a lawyer and fought for custody of Lucas and my fair share of our assets. Her family called me bitter and vindictive, said I was trying to destroy her out of spite. Were you? Maybe a little. But mostly I was trying to protect my rights and my relationship with my son. Sometimes standing up for yourself looks like bitterness to people who benefit from your compliance." They sat in comfortable silence, watching traffic move on Route 59 and lights come on in windows across the complex. "You know what the funny thing is?" Curtis continued. "My ex-wife and I get along better now than we did when we were married. Once we stopped pretending we could fix something that was fundamentally broken, we found ways to co-parent that actually work." "You think my family relationships are fundamentally broken?" "I think they're built on assumptions that don't serve you very well. Maybe shaking those up will help everyone find better ways to relate to each other. And if it doesn't, then at least you'll know where you stand." 2 weeks later, Patricia called with news. "Your family's lawyer wants to meet for settlement discussions. They hired a lawyer. A good one, Robert Mitchell from Springfield. He specializes in family property disputes. What kind of settlement are they offering?" $20,000 and a promise to include you in family gatherings going forward. Marin almost laughed. 20,000? It's insulting, I agree, but it tells us they're taking this seriously. They wouldn't be offering anything if they thought they could win outright. What's our counteroffer? 40% ownership of the house. or they buy you out for fair market value. The house is worth about $200,000, so we're talking $80,000. Will they agree to that? Not initially, but it gives us room to negotiate. The negotiation process stretched through December and into January. Both sides hired appraisers, conducted depositions, and gathered evidence to support their positions. Marin had to take time off work for meetings with lawyers and court appearances, burning through her vacation days and sick leave. The stress showed in her face and her sleep patterns. She lost weight and developed a persistent cough that wouldn't go away. Some mornings, she woke up wondering if the fight was worth what it was costing her physically and emotionally. But every time she considered dropping the case, she thought about Trent's smirk when he told her she was too cold for family life, about Melanie's satisfied smile when she showed off the yellow nursery, about Gerald's dismissive assumption that she would accept whatever scraps of belonging they offered. The case went to mediation in February. Marin sat across a conference table from her parents, Trent and Melanie, with lawyers flanking both sides like opposing armies. Gerald looked older than she remembered, gray-faced and tired. Helen had been crying, her eyes red and swollen. Trent wore a suit that didn't fit properly and kept checking his phone. Melanie was now visibly pregnant, her hand resting protectively on her belly whenever anyone addressed her directly. The mediator, a patient woman named Judge Reynolds, spent 4 hours guiding both sides through their positions and possible compromises. Gerald's lawyer argued that Marin's contributions to the household had been minimal and that living rent-free for years had more than compensated her for any expenses. Patricia countered with financial records showing that Marin had contributed nearly $30,000 to household expenses and home improvements over the past 10 years. She'd painted the exterior of the house twice, paid for new appliances when the old ones broke, and covered emergency repairs when Gerald was between jobs. "My client has been subsidizing this family's lifestyle for years," Patricia said calmly. She was led to believe this investment would be recognized when the property changed hands. Instead, she was forced out with no compensation and no acknowledgement of her contributions. "She lived in the house rent-free," Gerald's lawyer replied. "Her contributions were payment for room and board." At market rates, room and board would have cost her $60,000 over 10 years. Her actual contributions were $30,000. She was paying her fair share and more. The mediation broke for lunch with no resolution. In the hallway, Helen approached Marin alone. "Honey, please, can't we work this out as a family? This is working it out. I mean, without lawyers and courts and all this ugliness. You had a chance to work it out as a family when you decided to throw me out. You chose not to. We didn't want it to be like this. Then you should have made different choices." Helen's eyes filled with tears. "I miss you. We all miss you." "Do you?" "Because none of you called to check on me until I filed a lawsuit. We were trying to give you space to adjust. You were trying to avoid dealing with what you'd done. What do you want from us, Marin? What would it take to end this?" Marin looked at her mother, seeing the genuine distress in her face. Helen had never been cruel, just weak. She'd gone along with Gerald and Trent's plans because confrontation made her uncomfortable, not because she wanted to hurt anyone. But weakness that harmed others wasn't much better than deliberate cruelty. "I want recognition that I mattered," Marin said. "I want acknowledgement that throwing me away was wrong. And I want compensation for the life I built with you that you destroyed." "How much compensation?" "Enough to make it clear that actions have consequences, that you can't break promises and erase people without paying a price." The mediation resumed after lunch, but no agreement was reached. Judge Reynolds scheduled a trial date for April. "This is your last chance to settle before it gets really expensive," Patricia warned Marin as they left the courthouse. "Trials are unpredictable, and juries don't always see family disputes the way lawyers do." "What are our chances?" 50-50. Maybe better if the jury sympathizes with your position. Maybe worse if they think you're being greedy or vindictive. And if we lose, you pay your legal costs, and there's probably $40,000 total. And if we win, you could get everything you're asking for, or something close to it. That night, Marin sat in her apartment weighing the risks and potential rewards. $40,000 was more than she made in a year. If she lost the case, she'd be financially devastated. But if she dropped it now, she'd be exactly where she started, alone in a studio apartment with no family and no justice, watching Trent and Melanie raise their child in the house that was supposed to be hers. She called Patricia the next morning. "I want to go to trial." The trial took place on a cold April morning in the DuPage County Courthouse. Marin sat beside Patricia at the plaintiff's table, wearing her best business suit and trying to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. Gerald, Helen, Trent, and Melanie sat with their lawyer at the defendant's table. Melanie was now 8 months pregnant and clearly uncomfortable in the hard wooden chair. She kept shifting position and pressing her hand to her back, drawing sympathetic looks from the jury. Patricia had warned Marin about this. Pregnant women make sympathetic defendants. The jury will want to protect her, even if the pregnancy isn't really relevant to the legal issues. The trial lasted 3 days. Patricia methodically presented evidence of Marin's financial contributions to the household, the letters from her grandmother establishing Gerald's promise, and testimony from neighbors and relatives who remembered conversations about Marin inheriting the house. Gerald's lawyer painted Marin as a bitter daughter seeking revenge on a family that had loved and supported her for years. He argued that her contributions were gifts, that living rent-free had more than compensated her for any expenses, and that family conversations about the future weren't legally binding contracts. The plaintiff lived comfortably in her family's home for 27 years, he told the jury during closing arguments. She paid no rent, no utilities, no property taxes. When circumstances changed and the house was needed for a growing family, she was helped to find her own place. Instead of being grateful for years of support, she's demanding payment for what any responsible family member would contribute willingly. Patricia's closing argument focused on promises and reasonable expectations. Marin Rourke spent 10 years investing financially and emotionally in a home she was explicitly told would be hers someday. She painted the exterior, replaced appliances, paid for repairs, and contributed to household expenses based on her family's assurances that this was her future home. When those promises became inconvenient, her family threw her out with 3 hours' notice. They packed her belongings while she was at work and presented her with an apartment lease as compensation for a lifetime of contributions. This isn't about greed or revenge. It's about holding people accountable for the promises they make and the harm they cause when they break them. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before reaching a verdict. In the matter of Rourke versus Rourke, the judge read, "The jury finds for the plaintiff. The defendant is ordered to pay the plaintiff $60,000 in damages, plus attorney fees and court costs." Marin felt her knees go weak. $60,000. Not everything she'd asked for, but more than enough to change her life fundamentally. Behind her, she heard Helen crying and Trent cursing under his breath. Gerald sat stone-faced, staring at the judge like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Patricia squeezed her arm. "Congratulations. You won." But winning felt stranger than Marin had expected. Relief mixed with sadness, vindication with loss. She'd proven her point and secured her future, but at the cost of relationships she'd once treasured. The family scattered quickly after the verdict, avoiding eye contact with Marin as they filed out of the courtroom. Only Helen looked back, her face full of regret and something that might have been pride point 2 weeks later. Patricia called with an update. "Your family wants to discuss payment terms. They don't have $60,000 in liquid assets. What are their options? They can refinance the house to pay you, or they can sell it and split the proceeds. What do you recommend?" "That depends on what you want the outcome to be. If you want them to keep the house, Refinancing makes sense. If you want maximum disruption to their lives, force the sale. Maren thought about it for several days. Forcing a sale would be the ultimate revenge. Ejecting Trent and Melanie from the house just months before their baby was born. It would prove that her power to disrupt their lives was greater than their power to erase her. But it would also hurt Helen, who'd lived in that house for 30 years and loved it despite her weakness in protecting it. And it would harm an innocent baby who deserved stability regardless of their parents' failings. "Let them refinance," she told Patricia. "I want the money, not the house." The check arrived in late May, along with a brief note from Gerald's lawyer confirming that all obligations under the court judgment had been satisfied. No personal messages, no apologies, no invitations to reconciliation. But that night, Helen called. "I wanted you to know that we got your money together," she said. "Gerald had to take a second mortgage, but we managed it." "Good." The baby was born last week. A little girl, 7 pounds, 3 ounces. They named her Emma. Maren said nothing. "She's beautiful, Maren. She has Trent's eyes but your grandmother's chin. You'd love her." "Would I?" "I hope so. I hope someday you'll want to meet her." "Maybe someday. We miss you. I know that doesn't change anything, but I wanted you to say it. I miss you too, Mom. Do you think, is there any chance we could try again? Start over somehow?" Maren looked around her studio apartment, at the bills spread across her kitchen table and the photo albums stacked on her bookshelf. In a few weeks, she'd have enough money to buy her own place. A real home with multiple rooms and a yard where she could plant flowers. "I don't know," she said honestly. "A lot of damage has been done." "I know. We know. We all know what we did wrong." "Do you?" Because Dad seemed pretty convinced he was right throughout the whole trial. Helen was quiet for a moment. "Your father has a hard time admitting mistakes. But he knows. We all know." "What exactly do you know?" "That we treated you badly. That we took you for granted. That we chose what was easy over what was right. And that you didn't deserve what we did to you. You were a good daughter, Maren. You are a good daughter. We failed you, not the other way around." It was the closest thing to an apology Maren had heard from anyone in her family. Not complete, not detailed enough to address all the hurt, but genuine in its acknowledgement of wrongdoing. "Thank you for saying that. Will you think about giving us another chance?" "I'll think about it." After hanging up, Maren sat in her apartment feeling something she hadn't experienced in months. Possibility. Not the possibility of going back to the way things were, but the possibility of building something new with people who'd learned hard lessons about the cost of their choices. She called Naomi to share the news about the baby and Helen's apology. "So what now?" Naomi asked. "Now I buy a house. Start the life I was supposed to have 10 years ago. What about your family? What about them? Are you going to let them back in?" Maren considered the question. "Maybe. If they prove they understand what they did wrong and why it mattered. If they show me that things would be different. And if they don't, then I'll know I was right to cut them out of my life." The house hunting took 6 weeks. Maren wanted something small but well-built, with a yard big enough for a garden and rooms where she could display the belongings that had been boxed up and stored for so long. She found it on a quiet street in Batavia, 15 minutes from Aurora, but far enough away to feel like a fresh start. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with good natural light, and a backyard dominated by an old apple tree that reminded her of the oak in her childhood home. The closing was scheduled for early August. Curtis helped her move, bringing Lucas along to carry small boxes and explore the new place. "It's perfect," Lucas announced after touring every room. "Can we build a tree house in the apple tree?" "It's not our tree," Curtis reminded him. "It's Maren's tree. But she might let us help. Right, Maren?" "I might," she agreed, "if your dad thinks it's structurally sound." They spent the afternoon unpacking boxes and arranging furniture. Marin's books filled the built-in shelves in the living room, and her photos found homes on side tables and windowsills. For the first time in years, her belongings looked like they belonged somewhere. That evening, they sat on the back porch eating pizza and watching the sun set through the apple tree's branches. "How does it feel?" Curtis asked. "Like coming home," Marin said. "Finally. Any regrets about how you got here?" Marin thought about the question. The past year had been painful and expensive, full of legal battles and family drama that had consumed her energy and emotions. But it had also taught her important lessons about standing up for herself and demanding the respect she deserved. "No regrets," she said. "Just relief that it's over." But it wasn't quite over. 2 days after moving in, Marin found an envelope in her mailbox with no return address. Inside was a handwritten note from Trent. "Marin, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted you to know that I'm sorry for the way things went down. You were right about a lot of things, and I was wrong to dismiss your feelings the way I did. Melanie and I are doing okay in the house, but it doesn't feel the same knowing how we got it. We're thinking about selling in a few years and finding our own place. Somewhere without so much history attached. I hope you're happy in your new home. You deserve to be happy." It wasn't a complete apology, but it was acknowledgement that her feelings had been valid and her fight had been justified. Coming from Trent, who'd never admitted fault about anything, it felt like progress. Marin folded the note carefully and put it in her desk drawer. Not ready to respond, but not ready to throw it away either. On Labor Day weekend, she hosted her first dinner party in the new house. Naomi brought her girlfriend and a bottle of expensive wine. Curtis and Lucas arrived with homemade bread and a plan for the treehouse they'd been sketching all week. They ate on the back porch as evening settled over the neighborhood, sharing stories and making plans for fall projects. Marin felt surrounded by people who chose to be there, who valued her presence and contributed to her happiness without expecting anything in return. It was better than the family dinner she'd lost, because it was built on mutual respect rather than obligation. "To new beginnings," Naomi raised her wine glass in a toast. "To building your own foundation," Curtis added. "To tree houses," Lucas chimed in, raising his glass of lemonade. "To not disappearing," Marin said quietly. They drank to all of it, and to the future they were creating together. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Marin stood in her backyard looking up at the stars. The apple tree cast shadows across the grass, and lights glowed in neighboring windows where other families were settling in for the night. She thought about Gerald and Helen in the house on Maple Street, probably watching television and wondering if they'd ever see their daughter again. About Trent and Melanie learning to be parents, while living with the knowledge of how they'd displaced someone who'd loved that house longer than they had. About baby Emma growing up in rooms where Marin had once read books and done homework and dreamed about her future. She didn't hate them anymore. The angry fire that had sustained her through months of legal battles had burned itself out, leaving behind something calmer and more sustainable. She'd proven her worth to herself and established boundaries that couldn't be crossed without consequences. Whether her family learned from those consequences was up to them. Whether they rebuilt relationships based on mutual respect instead of assumed compliance remained to be seen, but she'd given them the tools to make better choices. And she'd given herself the foundation to build a life that didn't depend on their approval or inclusion. Standing in her own backyard under her own apple tree, Marin realized she'd found something she'd been searching for her entire life. A place where she belonged completely, without conditions or compromises. They'd thought she would disappear when they packed her belongings and handed her the keys to a studio apartment. Instead, she'd built her own foundation and invited people to join her who understood her worth. It was the best revenge of all, a happiness that didn't require their participation or permission.